Good afternoon, producer Susan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jerzee Joe. How are you?
I'm good. You have a good Labor Day weekend?
I did had a little football game.
So you didn't travel 400 miles each direction to go someplace?
I traveled about 20 minutes to the stadium.
By the way, you told me that I think last weekend you said it was like the arrival for all the freshmen, and you ran into a woman at the gas station from New Jersey, and
Yep, yep,
and she had to ask you how to pump gas because
yep,
in New Jersey she never learned how to pump gas for herself.
yep. Not only did she not know how to pump gas, she also didn't know how to use the pay at the pump feature.
That's, by the way, about 2 months ago, Oregon, which was the only other state in the union that wouldn't let you pump your own gas, they gave up on that. So now Jersey's the only state in the union where you can't pump your own gas.
And yet the most astonishing thing to me is that your gas is still cheaper than Pennsylvania.
That has to do with
You
the
have to
state.
pay labor costs on there. So imagine if you didn't have to pay labor cost, how much cheaper your gas would be
It would
even.
be about 12 cents a gallon cheaper because that's what they estimate the cost of the attendant adds to a gallon is 12 cents. And by the way, and in a lot of gas stations around here, after 11 o'clock at night, like if you're a nurse and you work and you don't get off till midnight, you can't get gas on the way home because all 90% of the gas stations close at 11 o'clock at night, or some of
Yep,
them even
don't have
close.
that problem around here. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Just pump the pump. All right. Hey, we got a full schedule today. I doubt I'm going to get to all this, but let me tell you what I'm going to try to get to. You know who George Orwell is, right?
Yep.
1984. We're going to
Yep.
do a quote from George Orwell's book about how the past can be erased and how the lie becomes the truth. Um, I'm going to share with the listeners some truly startling data on homicide rates by race in the United States. And I'll tell you which group of Americans is 5 times more likely to be murdered than members of any other racial groups in this country. It's really sad and astounding. Until I ran the numbers, I didn't realize how bad it was. And the most dishonest and deceptive thing I don't have a stupid thing that I've heard all week, but I heard this is the most dishonest and deceptive thing I've heard all week. I'll tell you how some politicians and political consultants are using Greek letters in their emails to shield sensitive and potentially embarrassing communications from discovery by the Freedom of Information Act request. You know about those, right?
Yep.
All right. We'll tell you about the latest tactic being used by Mexican drug cartels that could turn you into an unwitting smuggler of illegal drugs. We'll tell you why the predictions that the world will reach a point of, quote, peak oil consumption and then start to see that consumption reverse and decline sometime in the next 20 years are complete nonsense. In a story you won't see reported on TV, we'll tell you about a document that more than 1,600 scientists and professors have signed declaring that, contrary to what President Biden has said, these 1,600 scientists have said clearly and unequivocally, there is no global climate emergency, and they've signed a declaration, and they'll tell you why they think that way. Have you ever heard of something called the gun show loophole?
Yes, I have.
And if you listen to anti-gun people, they like to claim, well, you can just walk into a gun show and buy a gun without a background check. Well,
That's not true.
we'll tell you why that alleged gun show loophole is a complete myth. It doesn't exist. And finally, in our taxpayer relief shot segment, it comes to us from you know where a place called Munhall, Pennsylvania is?
Munhole?
Munhall.
Munhall. No, I don't
Apparently,
know
it's out near
that.
Pittsburgh. Well, in Munhall, Pennsylvania, two armed thugs break into the house of this 58-year-old guy's and guns, and they start shooting at him. Unfortunately for them, he had a gun and he shot back, and apparently he was a better shot than they were because he shot back and he wasn't wounded, but he killed one of the two armed thugs.
Okay, I just looked it up. I do know where that is.
All right. So here we go. Quote of the week from George Orwell, 1984. And that quote is, everything faded into the mist. The past was forgotten and the lie became the truth. Now, the reason I picked on that, because on an almost weekly basis on this podcast, we talk about media stories that are either false or misleading, but are believed by the vast majority of the people who hear them on TV. We've talked about these things. You hear stuff on TV, and we've debunked a lot of these stories, but the media keeps repeating these lies and these false narratives over and over and over to the point where, you talk to the man on the street. Well, did you hear about this? Now, and those issues can range from, climate emergencies, alleged increases in gun violence, or how successful Biden's economic plan is working, and what is responsible for our growing national debt. But they're still trying to blame Trump for the increase in our national debt. By the way, I should have, one thing I should have included, and I will talk about next week. Biden released his budget proposal for fiscal 2024, which starts October 1st, by the way. Do you know how much Biden's and the president's budget proposal is not just for next year, it has to include a 10-year look forward. Do you know how much Biden's budget proposal has the national debt increasing over the next 10 years?
I believe it was at 17 trillion.
$17 trillion.
Yep.
But somehow the media is going to tell you that $17 trillion going 10 years into the future is still Trump's fault. So that's where, everything is fading into the mist, the past is being forgotten, and the lie becomes the truth. That's just one example. I think next week we'll talk more about the 17 trillion of increase in national debt over the next 10 years. And by the way, that's an unadjusted, uninflated dollars. With inflation the rate it is, that 17 trillion will probably be closer if they stick to if it doesn't grow beyond the 17 trillion in 2023 dollars. With inflation, it would probably be much closer to $20 trillion over the next 10 years. All right. You want to talk about who's getting murdered in this country?
Who is getting murdered in this country?
Well, first of all, let me a little background. In 2021, the FBI changed its software and reporting protocols for states and cities and counties to report data, because they had this system that was in place, and all the police departments had it, and every time they booked somebody, they would simply enter the data. They were all familiar that, well, in 2021, they went to a different system. 60% of the jurisdictions didn't even download the software. And now they're getting about 70% reporting, but they still have 30 jurisdictions who are not reporting. So the most complete data we have at the moment is still the 2020 data. So these numbers I'm going to give you are from 2020. Well, in that data, and this is they call it the Uniform National Crime Report, the FBI showed that there were 17,815 non-justifiable homicides committed in the United States. So why did I need to add the word non-justifiable? Are there any other types of homicides?
Well, a self-defense, but that then wouldn't be considered homicide.
Yeah, actually it is.
Oh, is it? Okay.
When a police officer shoots somebody in the line of duty, or a homeowner or taxpayer relief shots, the coroner will rule that as a homicide, but it's a justifiable homicide. So when I talk about 17,815 non-justifiable, those essentially murder. It's the crime of murder. All right. So the police kill about 1,100 people per year, and as we've talked, the homeowners kill about 500 people per year. So you're closer to 20,000 total, but the non-justified ones are 17,815 in 2020. Now, in 2020, the population of the United States was 333 million. So if you divide 17,815 by 333 million, you come up with a national average homicide rate of 5.3 people per 100,000 population, which actually, that's like 0.5% of being killed. Your chance of being killed are actually at 0.05% of becoming a victim of a murder. But then if you look at those statistics by race, you find the following startling differences. For people who are of the white Caucasian, including white Hispanics, which are 75.5% of the population, that homicide rate drops from an national average of 5.3 down to 2.04 per 100,000, less than half. And then if you look at the Asian and American Indian homicide, and FBI groups Asian and American Indian into the same bucket, that's 7.9% of the population. The rate drops even further to 1.9 per 100,000. Then the only other racial category the FBI tracks is Black African American, which are 13.6% of the U.S. population. Now, with the national average being 5.3, do you want to take a guess at what the homicide rate per 100,000 is among the African American community?
So I'm going to take a guess that it's unfortunately higher. 7%.
How about 18.7?
Wow.
18.7 per 100,000. Wow. So remember, the national average is 5 among whites and Asian and American Indian. It's right about 2, And within the African American, it's 18.7 homicides per 100,000 population. And you get that number by there of the 17,815 total homicides, 8,469 were African American homicides, and they comprise 45.3 million people. So if you divide 8,469 by 45.3, you come up with 18.7. But now let's go back a little further. If we back out that 8,469 from the total of that 17,815, you'll find the number of annual homicides experienced by all other racial groups combined in this country is 9,346, right? 17,815 minus 8,469, you come up with 9,346. Well, if you divide 9,346 by the remaining 288 million population, which is all other groups besides African American, the rate for all other groups drops from the national average of 5.3 down to just 3.25 per 100,000. So it's startling. And this brings me back. We've talked about this quote before. So why is it happening? I'm going to go back to the quote by then Senator Barack Obama in his Father's Day speech, 2008. And for those who missed it, here's the speech he gave on Father's Day, 2008. Quote, "We know that more than half of all Black children live in single-parent households, a number that has doubled since we were children. We know the statistics that children who grew up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They're more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves, and the foundations of our community are weaker because of it." And as I've said before, when there's not a father in the home, the gang becomes the family unit, and the gang values become your values. And the gang values are, if somebody disrespects them, disrespects you, you shoot them. And I mean, that's my take. Do you have a different take?
No, it's sad, but unfortunately, probably very real.
So it's just sad. It's a social problem that translates to, to a societal problem. But within the African American community, it's epidemic. And again, it's sad that almost half the homicides in this country occur in the African American community, primarily, by the way, in inner cities. We talked about this before: Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, New Orleans. It's just really sad.
And Philadelphia, I believe, is always
And Philadelphia is right up
too,
there too, and
unfortunately.
Washington, D.C., by the way. All right. So have you ever done a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request?
I have not.
I have, actually. I've done a couple. I one time did a FOIA request to the state of New Jersey. I want to know how many concealed carry permit application they'd received, and how many they approved and how many they denied. Anyway, when you do that, you typically say, I want all documents, concerning this word or including this word or that word. Well, in Michigan, you're familiar with the Flint, the problems with the Flint water system, the lead pipes.
Yep.
Well, the governor and she had consultants, and because they didn't want these emails to be discovered in a subsequent Freedom of Information Act request, what they agreed to do, what her staff and these outside consultants, whenever they used the word Flint, as in Flint, Michigan, they would spell the word Flint containing one or more Greek characters. So that if you if you were a reporter and you asked for copies of all correspondings that mention the word Flint, all they do, the people who do these searches, simply do a word search. I'm sure you've done a word search in a Word document. You type in the word and you say, and the word software will tell you, we found 36 occurrences of the word, and then it will show you where those 36 occurrences were. Well, when you do that, if you ask for documents including the word Flint, but instead of I, it's got the Greek character iota in it, the word Flint spelled with iota instead of the English letter I won't show up. Can you think of anything more deceptive and dishonest than intentionally disguising words with Greek characters?
That's downright intent to conceal.
And intent to defraud. I would say intent to defraud.
Defraud.
Oh, goodness. All right. Let's move on to becoming a drug smuggler. Have you heard the term blind mule?
I have.
So you probably know what it is. For those who don't, the latest trick the cartels are using um, on the southern border at all these border crossings. A lot of the border guards, the border custom and border, will look at who the traveler is, how many times they've gone back and forth. Is this guy suspicious? Does the story make sense? But there are literally thousands of people a day drive from the United States into these Mexican border towns for cheap liquor, cheap drugs, cheap dental. They go back and forth. If you look at the show To Catch a Smuggler, there's literally thousands of cars a day going back and forth. And your typical American tourist doesn't raise the suspicions of the Border Patrol guards. Hey, why'd you? Oh, yeah, I went down to have some dental work done. Okay, great, you can go. Well, what they're doing is why these American cars are parked in shopping centers and outside doctors' offices. They're pulling up in trucks, and they're sending a guy out, and they've got these. You know what a niobium magnet is? These really powerful magnets.
Yeah.
Niobium. I didn't pronounce it correctly, but there's these. They have these drugs that inside the wrapper they have these incredibly powerful magnets, and they're sticking these bundles of drugs on the underside of the car along with the GPS tracking mechanism. So when these people drive their cars back across the border, assuming they make it through the Customs and Border Patrol, the drug cartels then use the GPS tracking device to find out where the car is. And by the way, they tend to pick on cars with Texas, Arizona, and California license plates. And then they simply send their U.S. cartel members over to crawl under the car, typically at night, and just pull these packages of drugs off the bottom of the car. Now, the drug sniffing dogs, by the way, have found half a dozen of these cars. And the people driving the car say, we had no idea. And the Customs Border Patrol is agreeing with them, and they're not charging the drivers. But that's assuming you can convince Customs and Border Patrol that you were an unknowing accomplice to smuggling drugs. But if you live in Texas, California, or Arizona, and you're driving across the border, be careful, because you could wind up being a drug smuggler. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I never thought about, we live too far from the border to drive across, but yeah, that's, I guess, a real threat.
Well, people sometimes they'll fly to like San Diego for a conference, and somebody say, well, let's rent a car and go down to Tijuana.
Yeah.
Tijuana is like 25 miles from, and so if you even do a rental car, you take your rental car to Tijuana, come back, you could be smuggling drugs. All right. You want to move on to peak? Have you heard anybody talk about peak oil?
No.
Well, a lot of climate change activists are saying, if we have enough windmills and we have enough electric vehicles and we get rid of gas stoves and blah, 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 the United States in the next 20 years will reach something called peak demand, where the demand for fossil fuel products will start to diminish and then level off and then start to decline. And we'll actually reverse, and so 30 years from now, we'll be using less oil products globally than we are today. But let me tell you why that's complete nonsense. In addition to various types of vehicle and jet fuels, oil is the raw commodity used to produce more than 6,000 other non-fuel products, ranging from plastics to fertilizers to aspirin to asphalt for shingles and paved roads. By the way, more than half of all the oil produced in this country, less than half of all the oil pumped in this country gets turned into some sort of fuel. The rest gets turned into products. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yes. Less than half of the oil pumped in this country is turned into a fuel that is burned. The rest is turned into, again, fertilizers, asphalt, shingles, aspirin, plastic. So anyway. So per the linked analysis, of the 1 billion people who lived in developed countries like the United States, Canada, Europe, Japan, Australia, their average per capita consumption of oil, and again, this is oil and all the oil-derived products, is 13 barrels of oil-derived products per year, not fuel, products, which includes. So there's 8 billion people in the world. So what about the other 7 billion people living in undeveloped countries like China, India, North Korea, Central Africa, and large portions of Central and South America, where car ownership is rare and the use of other petroleum-derived products still lags far behind the rest of the world. You want to take a guess at what their per capita oil consumption is?
So if ours is 13 barrels, 10.
3.
Oh.
3. So look at it this way. So even if those developed countries like the US, Canada, Europe were to cut their consumption back from 13 to 9, all right? Let's say we can reduce it by 40%. As the rest of the world continues its economic development, those countries which are 7 times larger than the developed countries, as they go from 3 up to this reduced target of 9, that increase of 6 barrels per person for those other 7 billion people will obliterate any reduction by the 1 billion people living in developed countries. So no, in your lifetime and your children's lifetime, we will never reach a situation of peak oil consumption. It just can't happen. Unless you want to disagree with me?
No, it makes sense.
Okay. How much time we got left?
Oh, you got about 15 minutes.
All right, good. So we're rolling right through this. I could have spent more time in that, but don't want to drag it out. By the way, a little editorial note. When I used to work at Carrier, we would look at countries, and as their per capita income would grow, like in China, you could predict as per capita income hit a certain level, the first thing people in those countries would buy would be a refrigerator or a stove. And then I'm sorry, it was stove first, then a refrigerator, then a washing machine for their clothes. And then the next item, and then it was a television, and then it would become an air conditioner. So we could predict, looking at the per capita income trends, in what year or years would a country begin to start buying residential air conditioning units. Well, it's the same thing with and that prediction of where when they're going to start to buy what appliances goes hand in hand with their increase in the consumption of oil-derived products. And again, a lot of those products I just mentioned are built with oil-derived products like plastics. All right. You've heard President Lyman declare a global climate emergency. Well, there's a petition that's just been signed by 1,600 PhDs, professors, and scientists from around the world, not just the U.S. They've signed a document declaring that there is no global climate emergency. And here's a quote from the story. International scientists have jointly signed a declaration dismissing the existence of a climate crisis and insisting that carbon dioxide is beneficial to the Earth, contrary to the popular alarmist narrative. And here's a quote. There is no climate emergency. The Global Climate Intelligence Group, it's called CLINTEL, said in its World Climate Declaration, which was made public in August. Climate science should be less political, while climate policy should be more scientific. Scientists should openly address uncertainties and exaggerations in their predictions of global warming, while politicians should dispassionately count the real costs as well as the imagined benefits of their policy measures. A total of 1,609 scientists and PhD professionals from around the world have signed that declaration, including 321 from the United States. So any reaction to that?
Yeah, the calendar says September, but the weather says July. So it must be a climate crisis. But
must be a climate crisis. And let's have this conversation again in January, right?
Yeah.
When you're buried in snow and it's 20 below.
And you will never hear me complain about how much snow was on the ground.
Right. All right. So let's move on to the myth of the gun show loophole. Anti-gun people, oh, gun show loophole. They want you to believe, and I think some of them actually believe, that you can walk into a gun show and buy a gun without going through a background check.
Which is not true.
Not true. And the reason the so-called gun show loophole is a myth is that the laws pertaining to the sale of guns and ammunition inside the four walls of a gun show are identical to the same gun laws that apply outside of a gun show all the other days of the year. So there's nothing that you can do inside a gun show that you can't do outside of a gun show. Now, people say, well, yeah, but there's guys and there's unlicensed gun. No. First of all, I've been to literally dozens of gun shows in different states, and they all have this big sign, no floor sales permitted. You know what that sign means and why they have it?
Yeah, because contrary to popular belief, you cannot walk into a gun show and buy a gun off the floor.
Well, you can buy it from a gun dealer who has a table, but a floor sale means you
Mhm.
can't walk in there with a gun over your shoulder with a for sale sign on it. Okay.
Yeah.
The organizers of gun shows say if you want to sell products at our gun show, you have to rent a table. And depending on the size of the gun show, the weekend rental for that table is either, is going to range from $300 to $750. Nobody looking to sell one or two guns,
Mhm.
privately owned guns, is going to walk into and by the way, a lot of states, even if you're a private seller, you still have to do a background check. But let's
Mhm.
assume you're in a state that doesn't have background checks for private sales. If you're one of those private sellers and you have one or two guns you want to sell, you
Mhm.
can't sell it at a gun show unless you rent a table. And I've never seen anybody who wanted to sell one or two guns was going to pay $300 to $750 to rent a table. And by the way, they
Mhm.
also have no floor sales and no parking lot sales because they don't want people selling guns in the
Yep.
parking lot. And they'll actually send the security guards out in the parking lot about once an hour to make sure
Mhm.
nobody's got his trunk open, selling guns out of their trunk. So no, private people are not selling guns at gun shows without doing background checks. And every gun dealer in there who has bought a table, if you're a federally licensed gun dealer, it doesn't matter where you sell that gun, whether it's in your shop or at a gun show, you are still required under federal law to perform the federal background check. That's ATF form 4473. So no, there is no gun show loophole because you can't do anything inside of a gun show that isn't done outside of a gun show. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, if you want to sell a gun to your buddy, it's not realistic for you to perform a background check. So, and I've been with friends who do this. We go up to the local gun store and we pay a small fee for the shop to do that for us because they're equipped to handle those sort of things for us.
Right, and the majority of states, by the way, do have something called universal background checks. And when I moved from
Mhm.
Colorado to New Jersey, I had a couple of guns that New Jersey said were illegal in the state of New Jersey, and I had to sell them. Now, I found a guy, I knew the guy, and he wanted to buy my gun, and I knew he was a good guy. But I didn't want it. But in Colorado, they have a universal background check law. And if I were to simply sell him the gun without going through the formality of a background check, and at some later date somebody was killed with that gun or the gun was stolen and they traced it back to me, I'd be in big trouble. So I said, Frank, I said, I know this is a pain in the butt. I know you're a good guy. You're not a criminal, but you're gonna have to meet me over at this gun store and I'm gonna have to pay the 25 bucks.
Yeah,
And
it's a small fee for,
yeah, for the peace of mind. So now I did it. So yes, I sold him one of my guns. It was like a $700 gun, and I, paid the 25 bucks, but we did it at the gun store. And I
and
handed
that's
the
a
gun.
small fee to pay to
Right.
make a $700 sale.
Yep. So the point is this thing about gun show loopholes is a myth. Private sellers are not selling guns at gun shows because they're not renting tables, and gun dealers still have to do a background check. So, all right, how much time we got?
Not about a good 5, 6, 7 minutes.
All right, so let's talk about our taxpayer relief shots, and we call them taxpayer relief shots. And I will let the sheriff of Santa Rosa County, Florida, explain to you why we call them taxpayer relief shots. And here we go.
If somebody's breaking in your house, you're more than welcome to shoot them in Santa Rosa County. We prefer that you do, actually. Hopefully, you'll save the taxpayers money.
And again, when we talked about this before, if you send a criminal to jail, if you have a trial and wind up convicting a thug and he goes to jail for 10 years, that costs the taxpayer $1 million. So we're going to go to Munhall, Pennsylvania.
Which, do you know where Munhall, Pennsylvania is located next to? What famous attraction?
No.
Kennywood, which is one of the oldest amusement parks in the country from the
Really?
1800s.
Okay, I didn't know that. I knew it was out near Pittsburgh. I didn't know it was right there. All right, Munhall, Pennsylvania. One of these two thugs is a former Marine gone bad. Here we go.
This a classic case of self-defense. He told me earlier today that he has no plans to pursue charges against the man who he says shot and killed a would-be intruder who took aim at him first.
Put yourself in that type of position. I mean, you come out, you're protecting your property, you're protecting your wife, you're protecting yourself. So,
by the way, this is the district attorney that's speaking. I'm going to back this up for you here.
He says shot and killed a would-be intruder who took aim at him first.
Put yourself in that type of position. I mean, you come out, you're protecting your property, you're protecting your wife, you're protecting yourself. Somebody opens up on you and you return fire.
Allegheny County DA Steve Sapala says that is exactly how it all played out in this dark alleyway in Munhall late last Monday night. An exchange of gunfire that ended with 23-year-old U.S. Marine Corporal Andrew Stevens shot dead in his tracks.
He is trained with a weapon, but on this particular evening, he didn't hit his target.
We were allowed to come along as homicide investigators got a closer look at the crime scene today.
Guy's yelling at you. Because he thinks at that point he can what's the harm on that.
Based on forensics and eyewitness accounts, police are now convinced that the 58-year-old homeowner, John Razgani, fired with deadly force only after Stevens took the first shots with a .45 caliber handgun.
He's very upset about this and he didn't set out to hurt anybody on that particular day.
23-year-old Sean Conroy was also arrested that night, charged as an accomplice in the late-night burglary turned deadly. The homeowner, who police say did what he had to do to stay alive, could not be reached for comment. The day after his brother's death, Scott Stevens released this statement saying, "I am deeply saddened losing my brother in such a tragic way. Sad for all of us, our family, and the homeowner." DA says that with this decision, this case is closed. The lives of two families forever changed. Reporting live here in downtown Pittsburgh, I'm Tamika Artist, Channel 11 News.
Well, hang on, let me close this up. And by the way, do you know that the accomplice can be charged with murder?
Yes, because in the
A
death in the
Death
during a
occurred
felony.
during the commission of a felony. So
Yeah.
yes, the accomplice, even though he didn't kill anybody, can be charged with murder under state law. So that's it. And again, 58-year-old guy winds up defending himself. Let's see, was there anything else before we wrap up here? Well, that's all I got today, unless you have something you want to add.
No, but you would appreciate this. Kennywood, which is next to Munhall, Pennsylvania, they in the spring, it's typical of a lot of high schools in general to do different field trips to different places. And Kennywood's an amusement park. So it's sometimes hard for teachers to justify why you would take your class to Kennywood, but they do physics day at Kennywood.
Okay.
And they have a physics worksheet that they hand out so that kids can actually learn something while they're riding roller coasters. So it's the force of the roller coaster and the speed, and they have
centrifugal force. Force equals mass times acceleration, and centrifugal force.
So all the different rides in Kennywood, they do. It's called Physics Day, and it's a big thing for the schools in the Pittsburgh area. They all go to Physics Day, and it's just a fun way for kids to learn about math and physics.
Well, that's great.
While riding roller coasters.
I learn something new every day. All right, we're right out of time. So I want to thank all of you who listen to this podcast for giving up 30 minutes out of your day. If you found these topics interesting, as important as I did, I hope you continue to listen to the podcast in the weeks and months to come. If you want to see some materials and story links you heard me talk about today, you can find them on the Jerzee Joe website at JerzeeJoe.com. And again, Jerzee spelled with an R and a Z, JERZEE, JerzeeJoe.com. If you want to send me an email, just do that by sending me an email to joe@JerzeeJoe.com. And that's all I've got, unless you want to add anything, Producer Susan.
No, did you have a good holiday?
I had a great holiday. Just went over to some nearby to relatives, had a little barbecue, and just took it easy.
Yep.
All right. Talk to you next week.
All right. Stay
care.
cool, because
All right,
it's not warm. It's warm out there.
All right. Bye-bye.